Hi, I'm Shira Carpel.
And I'm Shayna Gaunt, and we're board-certified behavior analysts. At How to ABA, we provide practical resources, community, and support to ABA professionals. In each episode of our podcast, we will be having real conversations with real people, sharing real stories about ABA.
We'll share relevant strategies and actionable tips that will make us all better ABA practitioners. It's the ABA content you need that you're not going to learn in a textbook.
Welcome. Today on the podcast, we're talking to Jaime Santana. He is an independent practitioner. He runs a company called Santana Behavioural Services, which provides services to youth and adults with developmental disabilities, to their families. He does consultation, parent coaching, and other needs. And he also mentors other supervisees to help them meet their credentialing needs, which is such an important area. So I'm really excited to learn more about that. Welcome, Jaime.
Welcome, Jaime.
Thank you for having me. It's pretty exciting.
Nice to have a fellow Canadian on. Jaime, you're from Toronto, right?
Yeah, I am.
Welcome.
Sorry, we keep talking over each other. We need a signal or something. We'll get there. Podcast number 45. We'll get there. 400 and whatever, right?
Growing pains.
We were just talking before the podcast started with Jaime a little bit about adult services and the need for adult services. And I don't know if any of you guys are out there like me, who traditionally I worked with very early intervention kids. And then as my kids got older, I started becoming an expert in I work now with, 8 to 10-year-olds, or now I'm an expert in the youth aspect of it. And then, oh no, these kids aren't kids anymore. What do we do? And Jaime, your role is so crucial. And I think that it's there's not enough people out there who are doing adult services. And there are some people who are, and looks in the Toronto area anyways, a lot of it looks more like respite than actual ABA. So how do you make that switch from looking less like respite and more like ABA?
I like everything you said is absolutely correct. There's so little services for adults out there, and what is available are kind of like respite day programs where they may do some very basic skill building, but they're not handling high levels of challenging behavior. They're not helping with developing further independence. They're not doing any of that. It's more of a place to go for people to stay busy while their parents are at work, and just to do something productive or some type of hobby, to develop some type of hobby and some community engagement, which is great and it's needed. But it doesn't fit the need of those adults with high challenging needs, right? With very, very high needs. And like you said, everybody focuses on the little ones, which is great. It's needed. We need that capacity, right? But then we tend to forget that, like you said, people grow up, right? And they become adults who sometimes have the same amount of needs, if not more, as they age. And the reality of that is really difficult, I think, because what I've noticed since I kind of opened up my own thing is that parents don't even know that ABA services for adults exist. So they don't even know that they could look for it. They don't even know that it's an option. So some of the emails I've gotten is like, I didn't even know this was a thing. I didn't even know this existed. I was just going to, head in there to the local respite support group. I didn't even know I can have somebody come into my home and do some parent coaching, right? So creating that capacity is so, so crucial as kids age. And the scope of practice is the same, right? So you may still be teaching the TACs, the introverbals, the MANs. You may still be teaching all those skills that you teach to the little ones, but you're just teaching them in a different setting. You're teaching them, the approach to teaching has to be a little bit different, right? It has to be more geared towards adults. So the main core of ABA, the main theory of ABA remains the same. You're still collecting data, you're still using high Ps, you're still, error correcting, you're still contriving MO, you're doing all of that type of thing, all of that type of stuff, but you're not doing it in the center, or you're not just doing it in the home. You're doing it in their workplace. You're doing it out in the community. You're doing it at the grocery store. You're doing it at the gym where they want to go and work out. You're doing it on the bus, and you're also expanding the skills that you're teaching. So You're not just teaching intraverbals and echoics. You're not just doing that. You can, obviously, because sometimes it's needed, but you're also teaching really, really cool skills. And I think this is where people people don't see the awesomeness that it is of working with adults, where you can get paid to teach somebody to take the bus and just go on a trip, right? You just jump in on a bus with them, teach them how to get from home to work. You could teach them how to make their favorite meals and just kind of work through that. And you can go out grocery shopping with them. You could take them out for lunch, right? And because if that's part of the programming for them to like pay for a meal, order a meal, sit at a restaurant and eat, you could go out for lunch. You could do so many different things, swimming, skating. There's just so many things that you can do and you can work on with an adult that you don't really focus on when they're little, right? Because the focus, I find, when they're little is to kind of school readiness, right? Get them ready to go to school, get them ready to get back into school, or get them skills that they will need to communicate, and kind of start building that foundation. But what's forgotten is that after 21, there is no more school. And now you have to find a different thing to keep these adults busy, or to keep them engaged, and to allow them to have a community feeling, right? To allow them to be engaged with the community. So that's when all those other extracurriculars come into play. And it's just so awesome when you're, teaching somebody to map out their route to go to work, including what time they have to leave their house, what time they have to wake up, get ready, and leave their house to get to work on time. It's a different scope, and it's super, super cool.
It's very rewarding. The little experience I have working with adults, I loved what you said about like, think about what's functional, and then you get to do that with them. We got to teach our clients how to walk from one place to the next, how to take the bus, how to get those pre-job readiness skills. While it was using principles of ABA, like you said, it was a little bit of a, mind shift into what is this child good at, or what is this teenager or adult good at? What skills do they need? Like thinking about 5 years into the future, what's going to be functional for them, and kind of working backwards. And it was kind of exciting to be able to make it really relevant, be able to go into the community, to be able to see those successes. So yeah, I love what you said. What I'm curious about is, like you said, like we spend so much time getting our kids used to school, and they're in school for like, the first 21 years of their life, or whatever that looks like. How can we do a better job of preparing them for that post 21? Because we can't start when they're 21. That's too late.
Absolutely. I think one of the biggest gaps in ABA programming has to do with sexuality, really and truly. Obviously, you're not, and sexuality takes, sexuality is a big overarching term for things like close the door when you go to the bathroom. Tell people not to come in when you're in the bathroom because you want to be alone, right? All the way up to things like masturbation and sexual intercourse, right? And obviously you teach that in an age-appropriate manner. And I think we spend so much time working on the other stuff, which is so needed, that we sometimes tend to put those really important skills in the back burner, right? Especially for the little ones. So when we're toilet training, or when we're teaching toileting, we're right there in the bathroom with them, because we have to be, right? We have to be in there. We have to help them. We have to deliver the reinforcers. But then we don't really fade ourselves out. We don't really fade ourselves out to the point where they've already mastered toileting. They don't need reinforcers after every little pee that they have. But we're still kind of in the bathroom, or we're still letting them pee with the door open. And now they're 7, 8 years old, fully mastered, fully toilet trained, and still peeing with the door open, right? So we don't fade that door closing. So I've noticed that I've had to teach a lot of 16, 17-year-olds, like, no, you don't start pulling your pants down as you're walking to the bathroom. You get in the bathroom, you close the door, then you pull your pants down, and then you do what you got to do. Similarly, we tend to forget some of the really important skills when they're little, because they're difficult skills to teach, right? Like wiping your behind after a bowel movement. It's a really difficult skill, but it's a lot easier to teach. I personally think it would be a lot easier to teach a child, like a 6, 7, 8-year-old child, than it is to teach a 19, 20, 21-year-old to wipe their own behind. And it's also really important to think about, because there's so much data out there that tells us that individuals who aren't independent with self-care skills, like showering, like wiping their behinds, like brushing their teeth, are so much more susceptible to abuse by a caregiver, right? And thinking as an ABA practitioner, the whole reason why we do what we do is to reduce the potential of harm, to increase independence, and to give our clients like a much better quality of life. And if we're kind of not doing that by not teaching these skills really early, we're kind of creating a little problem down the line. And we're just kind of kicking the can down the road, right? We're just waiting for somebody else to do it. And sometimes it gets too late, right? Dr. Peter Gerhardt always says, if you don't think you have time, it's because you don't. You're always running out of time. So start teaching very, very early. Start teaching these skills very, very early so that when you are 16, 17, 18, 20, 25 years old, you're not having to worry about it. You may have to do some boosters, right? Some refreshers, some practice, some training, but you're not teaching everything from scratch.
You raised some really, really important points there. And, one of those is that, with some of our adult learners, some of them are very high needs still, right? They've been through ABA, et cetera, but they're not truly independent. Or they may be semi-independent, but they still may need to live in some type of, supported independent living setting, or some type of group home setting. And in those cases, you're not just dealing with parents who are, caring for their child. You're working with caregivers of various ages, nationalities, cultural backgrounds, et cetera, who are now caring for these individuals. And the more that we can teach, I call it the nakedness, right? Like the more we can teach our students to be independent around anything that involves nakedness, the better off they are, because you're right, they are so vulnerable, especially people who don't have the language skills to be able to tell someone else, hey, I was just touched by blah, blah, blah. Or, hey, so-and-so looked at me funny. They don't have those language skills to always tell somebody, nor do they know that it's even wrong. Like you said, to urinate with the door open. They don't know that that's wrong because they've just always been doing it. So you're right. It's very, very important to teach those skills early. I remember, earlier on in my career, I even taught, I think it was an 11-year-old boy how to use a urinal. And it was so funny because it was one of my first experiences, teaching a boy to use a urinal, because and the whole urinal skill thing I had to learn. I was like, I don't know, what's the whole, social thing behind a urinal? But apparently, you got to keep your pants up when you're using your urinal, and you can't stand beside the next person when you're using a urinal, and you have to look a certain place and, not look there, but look here and what have you. So all of those nuances that go into all of those private / sort of public places where there is a potential for harm, those definitely need to be taught. And I love that you're saying, teach those at an earlier age so that they're not 20 and learning this for the first time.
Absolutely.
And I work with a lot of, I would say, younger students. So teenagers, elementary age students, those kind of kids. And I'm imagining you must work with a lot of families. I think one of the challenges is, as practitioners, we know how important it is to start early. We know how important it is when they're 10, 12, 14 to start working on those independent skills and those life skills. What do you recommend we tell families who still they need to be in a classroom and they need to, I could do all that for them and I could help them with all their independent stuff. I really want them to focus on school or whatever that looks like. When in our head, I'm thinking in 5 years from now, this is not really going to matter. He really needs to know how to cross the street. Is there any recommendation you have to get families on board to this, vision?
Well, I would say use their MO, right? So they really want to have their kids in school. They really want to have their kids engaged, right? And what you got to remind them is that EAs don't change diapers. Teachers don't change diapers, right? So, or they don't wipe bums. So if your child is in a diaper, by the time they get into school age, they're there and they're going to be uncomfortable. If they have a bowel movement in their pants, they're going to sit in it, or they're going to call you to pick them up, right? Especially if they don't have the skills to let somebody know that they've had a bowel movement. TAs and EAs, or they're busy by nature. The number of students that they have to look after is quite high, sometimes the ratio. So it's a lot more difficult for them. So I would kind of approach it in that way. You want your kid to be in school, absolutely. They need to be able to sit for a while to attend to class. They need to be able to follow instructions, read, write, whatever else you need to do. But they also need to be able to use the bathroom independently. Because if something happens, if they have an accident in the school, the chances of them changing that diaper, of changing them out of that clothes, is very low. They're probably just going to send them home, right? So forgetting to teach those skills is actually preventing you from getting into the school as well. And if you look at some social media posts, right, on some of the parent groups, you can see those stories out there. Like, my kid is not toilet trained yet, and they're having accidents at school, and they keep sending my kid home. It shouldn't happen. I'm not saying that it's okay for schools to do that. But the reality is that they also have to follow certain rules and certain regulations for their unions, for their employment, whatever else. I don't know, what ECEs have to do or any of that. But the unions have certain regulations to prevent things like potentials for harm on kids, right? So they have certain regulations that they need to follow. And part of that could be that they cannot change a kid's diaper, or they cannot help them wipe their bum or whatever. So we need to tell parents, like, this is part of them getting into school. This is just as important as them learning to read or write. It should be part of their curriculum, right? This is just as important as getting them out into the community. Plus, a lot of times I feel, again, from reading what's in the group, parents feel the need to kind of reduce stigmatization for their kids and help them kind of fit in with their peers. And part of that is also allowing the kids to be able to independently go into the bathroom and be toilet trained and, do whatever they have to do on their own without having to ask the teacher for help, and which can also increase stigma, right? So just kind of talk to parents, approach it in that way. Like, this will help you meet your goals. This will help you meet your goals now. This will help you meet your goals 5 years from now, 10 years from now. Because yeah, sure, you can help a little 7-year-old, but what about when they're 15? Are you still going to be that comfortable doing it for them? What about when they're 20? What about when they're 30 and you're now in your late 70s? Are you still going to be able to do it now? So have that conversation as well, right? Like, short-term goals, 5 years from now, a month from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now. What are your goals then? And then break it down as to what are the most pertinent skills to start developing now. Doesn't mean that they have to do it tomorrow. Doesn't mean that you have to put all your focus into that one skill, but at least start working on it slowly and shaping it to a full independence, right?
Yeah. And I think, like you said, really understanding where the parent is coming from. As a practitioner, we want to go in and be like, well, your child is 12, they shouldn't sleep in your bed anymore, so let's end it. But realizing that this parent and child have a whole history, and there's so much, there's sleep involved, which is like so sensitive. And that's a relationship. Like, we can't just come in and think we're going to change it all of a sudden, but talk about shaping, be empathetic, see it from the parent's perspective, but still really work on those goals, because long-term, like, are they still going to be, relying on their parent for everything, which is not ideal. So yeah, I love how you said tapping into their MO, understanding where they're coming from. Those are all really good points. Yeah.
And like you said, always be empathetic, right? There's a reason why, as behaviorists, we know that behavior happens for a reason, right? There's always a contingency attached, and whether that be negative reinforcement for the parents, like, they're sleeping in my bed because then I could actually sleep, or positive reinforcement, escape from crying throughout the whole night, whatever it is, there's always a reason. So it's not just getting them out of the bed, it's getting them out of the bed, but still letting you getting your full night's rest, right?
Exactly. That's a whole other area too. I mean, as behavior analysts, we can walk in somewhere and, you can say, exactly what the function is. I know exactly why, that kiddo's not getting out of your bed, or you're doing this and that's preventing your child from this, or, why aren't they independent? Because parents are still doing this for them. And you can see it, and you can see it clearly, but you're right. We have to have that empathy for the parents. We have to have that compassionate care for the parents, and we have to be able to empathize with them and say, listen, we understand there's a whole history here of what's going on. Let's help you together, and maybe together we can go through this, and let's work on these baby steps to get you and your child there.
Exactly. That's exactly it, right? At the end of the day, you have to work, especially when you're working with adults, you have to work with the parents, because there aren't a lot of centers that do this type of stuff. Right. If you're working with little kids, you could be like, I'm not doing any in-home stuff. If parents could come in, we'll do parent coaching in the clinic. It's easier and all of that. But when it comes to adults, there isn't a lot of ABA spaces for adults. There are two centers that I can think of off the top of my head that work strictly with adults.
And that's in Toronto. Now, there's different centers in, different places like New York and California, Florida. Those major hubs have it going on. But there's still a lot of places in the US that don't as well.
Absolutely. Like in Canada, the US is so far ahead in when it comes to ABA.
But only certain states. Sorry, I'm cutting you off. But
absolutely. No, absolutely. But I mean, in general, the fact that ABA is medically necessary and it's funded by the government across the country in a evidence-based manner is already like a win, I think, right? But there's I think internationally there isn't a lot of space for adults. So when you're working with youth and adults, when they've aged out of these IBI centers or these early intervention centers, you have to do it in home, or you have to open your own clinic. And opening up your own clinic is difficult. It's not easy, right? Mm-hmm. So, plus adults aren't really going to be you can for little kids, you can set up a clinic so that it looks like a classroom, so that the transition into a classroom is easy. But for adults, it's not really about that anymore. They're not transitioning into a classroom. They're going to be transitioning into work. They're going to be transitioning into the community. They're going to be transitioning into everything else outside of school. Everything else that happens after you're done school. So it's not really about generalization at that point anymore, right? You don't necessarily need generalized skills. I mean, you need some. You need generalized manners. You need generalized tact. You need generalized communication, absolutely. But when it comes to skills, you don't really need to focus on generalization anymore. You could, especially for those really high needs clients, you could just focus on environment-specific skills.
Here's how to do this at Walmart, because that's where your job is.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Here's how you stock shelves at Walmart. Absolutely. Here's how you peel potatoes in the kitchen. You don't need to teach peeling potatoes anywhere else. It doesn't have to. Who cares if it doesn't happen in the stairwell, right? As long as it happens in the kitchen, it's good.
Yeah.
But with mans, you need them to happen at the stairwell. You need them to happen on the bus. You need them to happen in the kitchen. With these really strict environments, or these really stimulus, we got to place stimulus control on these skills when they're adults, and you don't really have to worry about the generalization unless they have multiple work settings where they have to do the same thing in different areas. In that case, you just need to make sure that they've generalized to those specific areas, but not in every single kitchen in the world, right?
Right. So we're just teaching it to the specific environment, which actually is much easier for them to learn if we can limit it without having to mix it up on them and intersperse things like that. You mentioned Dr. Peter Gerhardt, who, if anyone hasn't checked him out, highly recommend for anyone who's, working with an adult or even teen population. He's an amazing resource. Is there anyone else or any other resource you could recommend for someone who may be getting into this population or who is interested in supporting their current clients in a better way to prepare them for adulthood? Is there anything you recommend?
Dr. Pat McGreevey. He is one of my favorites, not only because he's a precision teacher, but because he is, he just, the way he views teaching with youth and adults is just so completely, it's different, right? It's if anybody has ever used the Essentials for Living assessment, you can just tell the amount of work that he's put in with adults, right? And that assessment is not only for people with autism or developmental disabilities. That assessment is for any type of disability, physical, developmental, any type. And it breaks down every skill to every type of interaction that you could have. So it allows you to assess every skill needed to communicate using pictures. It allows you to assess every skill needed to communicate using an augmentative communication device for speech, everything, right? Even down to solving problem behavior. It's all there. So if you haven't checked it, if you work with youth and adults and you've never heard of the Essentials for Living, I suggest you check it out. If you work with little kids who are starting to not be so little anymore, and you're trying to get ideas of what you should teach as they grow up, check out the Essentials for Living. Every skill that you can need, it has, I think, about 500 different skills. It's all there, and it's all broken down into must-have skills, which are like things you need to have for everybody, regardless of what you're doing. Everybody needs to have this, all the way up to nice to have skills, which are like, if you have them, you have them. If you don't, whatever, you can still live your life. And it's packaged in a way that's just so easy to follow and so obvious once you look at it, right? And it gives you some really, really great ideas on the sort of skills you can start teaching.
Yeah, I love his must have and nice to have. I think it really puts it into good perspective for us practitioners where, yeah, it's really nice if they could, tact flashcards or whatever, but they must be toilet trained and they must be independent with certain self-help skills. So yeah, I love how he breaks that down.
They must let you put a shirt on them if they can't do it on their own, right? They must cooperate with putting their hands up when you're trying to put a shirt if they have a physical disability and they can't do it themselves, right? All that type of stuff is, and there were some skills that I hadn't even thought about before working with, before going through the Essentials for Living, right? A skill like they must let you buckle them into their wheelchair, right? Which obviously translates to the car as well. But we work with some people who may not walk, so they may need assistance with mobility and all those, and they come back to safety skills, right?
Yeah, that's awesome. In terms of, a BCBA in the field, what is the best advice anyone's ever given you as a BCBA in the field that you would love to pass on?
The best advice that I ever got was don't be a hard ass. Don't be scared to deviate a little tiny bit from your plan if it's to benefit the family or the individual, right? So if you develop a plan that you think is awesome, and it's, it's scientifically sound, you did all your research, and the family goes, this won't work for me. Don't hammer it in. Don't be like, no, it has to work. This is the plan, follow the plan. Be flexible, right? And it goes back to being compassionate when providing care. Be flexible, be willing to change your plan, make it just as effective, but in a different way that would benefit the family, that would benefit your client, and that would take longer. And it also benefits you, right? If it's something that the family says, yes, I can do this, they're more likely to kind of work with you or practice. Whereas if they tell you this won't work and you're like, no, you have to do it, they're not really gonna, the likelihood of them practicing outside of your sessions is a lot less, right?
Yeah, I love that. It's so important to, like you said, be flexible. Like it's not our way or the highway. Like we're here to help other families and other individuals. And if it's not going to work for them, then we're not doing our jobs.
Exactly.
I also think it's super ironic that, we teach the individuals we work with to be flexible and we complain about rigidity and et cetera with our learners. And then when it comes to us, nope, this is the way it is. Nope, we need to fill that box in on the assessment. Nope, we need to, it says right here in the behavior plan, we need to do this, right? So You're right. Absolutely. We need to examine ourselves as professionals and say, well, we need to be, a lot more flexible as well. Absolutely.
And I think it also goes down to like, changing our mindset from like teaching compliance to teaching cooperation, right? We want to create self-advocacy skills in our clients. So we can't be like, I said, tack this, you need to tell me this right now or else what? No, if the client is not assenting to that, then transition to something else and come back to it, right? You got to be flexible in that way and work more on cooperation rather than making sure it's whatever you said is done right there and then.
That's huge. Jamie, I think from you, cooperation versus compliance. I really, really, really like that.
Yeah. Especially as they get older. It's a lot harder to have an adult comply with something when they are 6 feet tall, 230 pounds, than when they're, 5-year-olds. So that's why cooperation is a lot more beneficial in the long term.
Well, that and our ultimate goal of ABA isn't supposed to be pure compliance. It's supposed to be enhancing quality of life. And if you're teaching someone to just be a yes person, that's not quality of life.
Exactly. Absolutely.
Wow. Okay. Well, that was super enlightening. I think we all need to be more aware as ABA professionals, no matter what age we work with, about preparing our learners. So I thank you for sharing that with us. Anything else you want to add?
Thank you for having me, and I'm glad you're putting out some resources out there. I don't think there's ever enough ABA resources.
Jaime, thanks. Jaime, thanks so much for joining us today. I could seriously talk to you all day about adult services, and I might have to, end this conversation, but I'm going to be calling you again and we'll touch base about other things for sure.
Anytime.
So, excellent. Jaime Santana, everybody, from Santana Behavioural Resources in Toronto. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks for joining today's conversation. Wherever you get your podcast, please go and subscribe, rate and review so others can find out about us too.
For more from How to ABA, including free resources and ABA materials, visit our blog at howtoaba.com and make sure that you're following us on social media for more practical tips and updates.